When I was a sophomore in medical school, I decided to visit my parents for Christmas break. The semester had been rough, and I was looking forward to relaxing at home. When I got there, I noticed a change in our neighborhood. A new person had moved in next door. My parents mentioned him during dinner. His name was Gordon, a doctor in his 50s, and he seemed nice enough. I met Gordon not long after. One snowy afternoon, I was shoveling our driveway when he walked over and introduced himself. "Hi there, I'm Gordon, your new neighbor," he said with a warm smile. He had a firm handshake and seemed very professional. As a medical student, I found him inspiring. During the holidays, Gordon and I became friends. He often waved when he saw me outside, and we had a few friendly chats. He was always happy to share his experience and give me some advice about medical school. But despite his friendliness, something about him felt off. He was just a bit too eager to connect, and I couldn't put my finger on why he made me uncomfortable. When I came home for summer break, something strange happened. On my first morning back, I woke up to a weird noise. It was early, the sun was barely up, and I heard what sounded like digging. Curious, I looked out the window and saw Gordon in his yard, digging a hole. It was odd, and when I tried to get a better view, I accidentally knocked over my desk lamp. Gordon suddenly looked up, straight at my window. I quickly ducked out of sight, my heart pounding. A few days later, I saw a new flower bed where Gordon had been digging. It was full of fresh, colorful flowers, but it didn't make me feel any better. Gordon was just as friendly as ever when we met, even offering me some medical books he thought might help with my studies. I thanked him, but never found the time or the courage to visit his house. As the summer went on, I noticed a new flower bed appear in his yard. It made me uneasy, but soon enough, it was time to go back to school, and I left it behind. As September came, I called my parents to check in. They told me Gordon had suddenly moved. Apparently, his father passed away, and he inherited a house in Virginia. It was unexpected, and they didn't know many details. I felt a weird mix of relief and curiosity. When I returned home for fall break, Gordon's house was still empty. One afternoon, our quiet neighborhood was shaken up by the arrival of police cars. Officers started digging in Gordon's yard. The tension was high as neighbors gathered, whispering anxiously. My parents and I watched from our porch, a sense of dread growing. The police uncovered human remains in Gordon's yard. The news spread quickly. Gordon was suspected of being involved in several missing persons cases. The flower beds that had seemed so innocent were now deeply disturbing. I felt a chill remembering the morning I saw him digging, and how he had looked right at my window. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had been to him, how I had almost visited his house. What would have happened if I accepted his invitation for coffee? The thought made my skin crawl. The police were still searching for Gordon, but there was no word on where he was. As I got ready to go back to school, I kept looking at the empty house next door. The memory of Gordon's smile haunted me. Every night in my dorm room, I lay awake, thinking about him. The man who seemed so inspiring and friendly was now a nightmare in my mind. The darkness he hid had almost trapped me, and that was terrifying. I just hoped that wherever he was, he would stay far away and never return. When I first found the apartment, I couldn't believe my luck. It was in the heart of the city, close to work, and surprisingly cheap. The building was old but charming, and the apartment itself seemed perfect. For the first week, everything was great. I settled in, enjoying my new space and the vibrant neighborhood. But then, strange things started to happen. One evening, while I was taking a bath, I heard a howling noise coming from the apartment above me. It sounded like someone in pain, a long, mournful wail that echoed through the pipes. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just the old plumbing or the neighbor's TV. Still, it left me feeling uneasy. A couple nights later, I heard a scratching noise at my door. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, more insistent. My heart raced as I lay in bed, straining to hear. Eventually, the scratching stopped, and I convinced myself it was just a mouse. But the worst came one night when I was jolted awake by a loud banging on my door. The sound was relentless, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I crept out of bed and carefully looked through the peephole. Standing there was an old woman, her face twisted in anger. She started screaming insults at me, calling me all sorts of horrible names, accusing me of things that made no sense. I stood there, frozen, as she continued her tirade. Eventually, she left, but I was too shaken to sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I felt absolutely drained. I could barely keep my eyes open at work, my mind constantly replaying the events of the night before. I knew I couldn't go on like this, but I wasn't sure what to do. 2 days later, as I was leaving for work, I found small animal bones scattered near my door. That was the final straw. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called the landlord, desperate for answers. The landlord sounded weary, as if he had heard this all before. He explained that the old lady from upstairs was delusional. She had been like this for years, particularly towards women who rented my apartment. She believed they were trying to steal her husband from her. Even though he had passed away 6 years ago, he apologized and assured me he would talk to her, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. I decided to leave. I couldn't live in a place where I felt unsafe and constantly on edge. I found a new apartment, a bit farther from work and more expensive, but worth the peace of mind. As I packed up and moved out, I couldn't help but reflect on my experience. It had been a nightmare, but also a lesson. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Everyone should be careful when an apartment is way too cheap. There's often a reason for the low price, and it's usually not a good one. As I settled into my new place, I felt a sense of relief. I was finally free from the strange happenings and the deranged neighbor. I could sleep soundly again, and that was worth every extra penny I had to pay. Moving into my new apartment was a mix of relief and uncertainty. Freshly single after a messy breakup, I needed a place to crash and fast. So when I stumbled upon this place, I didn't think twice before signing the lease. Sure, the neighborhood wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst either. There were a couple of regulars, mostly harmless alcoholics, who occupied the building. They kept to themselves, and I didn't mind. Everything seemed fine until I noticed the peculiar activity across the hall. It started on Fridays. People would come and go, in twos and threes, always heading to the apartment next to mine. At first, I dismissed it as a weekly gathering of friends, or maybe a rotating game night. But I didn't hear any music or other noises. I became curious, perhaps too curious for my own good. I started to keep an eye on the comings and goings, noting the different faces and the whispered conversations in the hallways. I even tried to catch glimpses through the peephole, but the angle was all wrong, and the hallway was too dimly lit to make out much. Frustrated by my lack of answers, I decided to seek help from an unlikely source, the alcoholics who frequented the building. One evening, I struck up a conversation with one of them, a grizzled man named Frank, who always seemed to be nursing a bottle of cheap whiskey. I asked him about the people across the hall, trying to sound casual despite the anxiety gnawing at me. Frank glanced in the direction of the apartment, his expression unreadable. Then, a sigh. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of alcohol. "You noticed them too, huh?" he muttered, his voice low. "They're a strange bunch, always skulking around, never saying much. I've seen them sneaking in late at night, carrying all sorts of weird junk. Candles, jars, and even a freaking cow skull." I pressed him for more information, my curiosity bordering on desperation. Frank hesitated, his gaze flickering towards the apartment once again. "I've got a theory," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I think they're a cult." A chill ran down my spine at his words. A cult? It sounded absurd, like something out of a bad horror movie. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The secretive meetings, the strange behavior, it all fit. Determined to uncover the truth, I continued my surveillance of the apartment. I listened for any clues and watched for any suspicious activity. And then, one fateful Friday evening, as I returned from doing groceries, I saw something that confirmed Frank's suspicions. A group of people, dressed in dark clothes, emerged from the apartment. They moved with purpose. Their faces showed no emotion. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched them disappear into the night, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I couldn't just ignore what I had seen, but I also didn't want to put myself in any danger. I debated calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I suspected my neighbors were part of a cult? But I didn't even have any proof. In the end, I decided to confront my landlord. Maybe he could shed some light on the situation, or at least take action to address my concerns. But when I approached him, he brushed off my worries, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. He assured me that these people were just a group of friends who liked to dress up for their weekly gatherings. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't push the issue. Instead, I resolved to keep a low profile, stay out of their way, and hope they didn't notice me. But the unease lingered, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. I couldn't help but feel that something sinister lurked just next door, waiting to pull me into its dark embrace. In the few weeks that followed, I tried to go about my life as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper in the hallway sent a shiver down my spine. I found it increasingly difficult to sleep, my mind racing with dark thoughts and unsettling visions. And then, one night, it happened. It was the sound of chanting that woke me up. Faint at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. I lay in bed, frozen with fear, as the voices filled the air, their words unintelligible, but dripping with malice. I knew then that I had to leave. I couldn't stay in that place a moment longer. In the following weeks, I searched tirelessly for a new apartment, determined to put the nightmare behind me. It took time, and more than a few sleepless nights, but eventually, I found a place far away from that haunted building. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what lay behind those closed doors, and what horrors awaited anyone foolish enough to uncover them.